The hospital ward smelled of disinfectant and something else, that peculiar odor that appears when people lie motionless for too long. I slowly opened my eyes and tried to focus on the white ceiling above my head. My chest still felt dull and aching, as if someone had squeezed my heart in their fist and then let go suddenly. I remembered falling in the kitchen, trying to reach the top shelf for a jar of tea. I remembered the sharp pain that pierced my chest and how the floor suddenly seemed too close to my face. Then everything blurred into a hazy nightmare of flashing lights, loud voices, and the feeling that my body no longer belonged to me. The ambulance arrived quickly. It seemed like 10 minutes after I managed to reach the phone. The doctor in the car was shouting something, giving me an injection, and all I could think about was that I had forgotten to turn off the gas under the kettle. Now I was lying in a 4-bed ward, hooked up to some machines that made quiet noises from time to time. My bedmate was asleep, turned toward the wall, and I was grateful for the silence. At 72, I was used to being alone. My husband had died 10 years ago, and since then, the house in Miramar had seemed too big and too quiet. But the hustle and bustle of the hospital tired me more than the silence at home. On the bedside table lay my medical chart in a blue folder. I tried to reach it, but my arm was too heavy, and there was a needle from the IV sticking out of my vein. I closed my eyes again, trying to remember what the doctor had said during his morning rounds. Something about my condition being stable, about the need for observation, about medication. Her heart had failed, he said, but nothing critical. At my age, such attacks were not uncommon, especially in women. The door to the ward opened with a quiet creak, and I heard familiar footsteps, quick, jerky, a little nervous. Fenella always walked like that, as if she was late for an important meeting, even when she was going to the store for bread. When she was little, I always told her, "Don't rush, life isn't going anywhere." Apparently, she didn't listen. "Mom, are you awake?" My daughter's voice sounded cautious, almost a whisper. I opened my eyes and turned my head. Fenella was standing in the doorway, holding a small bouquet of gladioli, the very flowers I had hated since childhood, but my daughter had apparently forgotten that, or maybe she never remembered. I had always loved simple daisies or cornflowers, but for some reason, Fenella thought I liked these solemn, almost mournful flowers. "Hi, sweetie," I tried to smile, but my lips were dry and my voice sounded hoarse. "Thank you for the flowers." Fenella came closer, placed the gladioli on the windowsill next to the wilting ficus, and sat down on a chair next to the bed. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, disheveled hair, a gray business suit that she had obviously worn all day at work. I noticed that my daughter had lost weight since we last saw each other. That was 3 months ago, on her birthday, when I came to her rented apartment with a cake and a present. "How are you feeling?" Fenella asked, but her gaze had already slipped to the medical chart on the nightstand. Strange, she usually avoided anything to do with illness and hospitals. "Better," I lied. In fact, every breath was difficult, and my head was foggy, and the fog refused to lift. The medication, probably. The doctor said it was a minor attack, nothing serious. Fenella nodded, but I had the impression she wasn't listening to me. Her gaze shifted back to the blue folder with the documents. She even leaned forward slightly as if trying to see what was written there. "What exactly did he say? About treatment? About medication?" Fenella's voice sounded too interested for someone who usually cringed at the word pharmacy. I frowned. My daughter had never been particularly interested in my health. When my knees hurt or my blood pressure was high, she would say something like, "Well, Mom, you need to see a doctor," and change the subject. Even when my father died, Fenella was more concerned about arranging the funeral and sorting out the paperwork than how I was coping with the loss. "Dr. Horowitz said I need to take my medication and get more rest," I replied cautiously. "Nothing serious, just the usual heart medication." Fenella stood up and paced around the ward. She glanced out the window, where it was already getting dark, then walked over to another bed where an elderly woman was sleeping, then sat down again. I noticed my daughter nervously fiddling with the strap of her leather handbag, a new, expensive one. Strange, considering that Fenella had been having money problems since her divorce. "Mom, are you sure the doctor prescribed the right dosage?" she asked suddenly. "I read on the internet that more aggressive treatment is often needed after heart attacks." I was even more surprised. Fenella had been reading about heart attacks? The same Fenella who said that medical websites gave her migraines? How do you know what I've been prescribed? I tried to sit up in the pillows. I didn't tell you anything about the dosage. We just saw each other. Fenella blushed and looked away toward the window. Well, I just thought, at your age, your body may not be able to handle the usual doses. Maybe you should talk to your doctor? Make sure the treatment is effective. At that moment, Dr. Horowitz entered the room. He was a man in his 50s with graying temples and tired eyes, wearing a white coat that clearly needed washing. I liked him. He spoke simply, without medical jargon, and didn't rush like many young doctors. He also reminded me of my late husband, the same build with the same kind wrinkles around his eyes. "Good evening, Mrs. Caswell." He smiled at me, then looked at Fenella. "You must be her daughter. You look very much alike." "Fenella Caswell," she introduced herself, hastily rising from her seat and extending her hand for a handshake. "Doctor, I wanted to ask about my mother's condition." Dr. Horowitz took the medical chart from the nightstand and quickly glanced through the notes, muttering to himself. "Her condition is stable," he said finally. "The attack wasn't too severe, but at her age, we have to be careful. We've prescribed supportive therapy, heart medication, and blood thinners. Standard protocol." "And the dosage?" Fenella asked quickly, and I noticed her voice become more tense. "I read that older people sometimes need higher doses." The doctor raised his gray eyebrows in surprise. "On the contrary, we usually prescribe lower doses to avoid side effects. Your mother tolerates the medication well, and her test results are normal. Her kidneys and liver are functioning well for her age." Fenella stepped closer to the doctor, and I thought I detected a note of insistence in her voice that I hadn't noticed before. "But Mom complains of pain, severe chest pain," she said, and I almost choked with surprise. Maybe the standard dosage isn't helping her? I opened my mouth to object. I hadn't noticed any particular pain, at least not that my daughter had mentioned. But Fenella continued, not letting me get a word in, as if she had prepared this speech in advance. "I'm very worried about Mom. She's so strong. She never complains, but I can see how hard it is for her. Maybe we should reconsider the treatment, make it more intensive?" Dr. Horowitz frowned and looked at me intently. "Mrs. Caswell, are you really in a lot of pain?" I met my daughter's gaze. There was something strange in Fenella's eyes. A feverish interest that was not at all like the usual concern of a daughter. It was more like the look of someone who wants something badly and is willing to lie to get it. "Well, sometimes it hurts," I replied cautiously, still not understanding what my daughter was getting at. "But not very badly. Mom always downplays things," Fenella quickly interjected. "She's from a generation that's used to suffering. But I can see how she grimaces when she thinks no one is looking, especially at night." The doctor nodded thoughtfully and wrote something down in the chart. "All right, I'll take that into account. We can adjust the pain medication if necessary. But there's no need to change the main heart medication yet. The dosage is correct." Fenella nodded, but I sensed that she was not entirely satisfied with the doctor's response. Something resembling disappointment flashed across her face. After the doctor left, an awkward silence hung in the room. Fenella sat back down and took my hand. Her palm was damp and cold. "Mom, you understand that I'm worried about you, don't you?" she said, her voice almost breaking. "I understand," I replied quietly, but inside I felt a knot forming in my stomach. I looked at my daughter and tried to understand what was going on. Fenella was a good daughter, not very attentive, preoccupied with her own problems, but not mean. After the divorce, she had become even more withdrawn and irritable, but I attributed that to stress and financial difficulties. Now, however, there was something new, something disturbing in her behavior. "I'll bring you some fruit tomorrow," Fenella said, getting up and adjusting her purse on her shoulder. "And I'll talk to the doctor. I want to make sure you're getting the right treatment." After my daughter left, I lay awake for a long time, staring into the darkness outside the window and listening to the steady breathing of my roommate. Something in Fenella's tone, in her insistent questions about the dosage of the medication, disturbed me more than the pain in my chest. Much more. In the morning, I was awakened by noise in the hallway. Someone was talking loudly, doors were slamming, and wheelchairs were squeaking. I opened my eyes and saw that my roommate was already awake and eating breakfast, slowly chewing semolina porridge. It was 8:30. The rounds were about to begin. The nurse brought me my medication, several colorful pills in a small plastic cup. I obediently swallowed them with warm water from a jug. My heart was beating more steadily than yesterday, and I was breathing easier. Maybe I was really getting better and would soon be able to go home to my usual routine and quiet. Around 10 in the morning, Dr. Horowitz arrived with a group of young doctors. They discussed my condition, looked at my chart, and listened to my heart with a cold stethoscope. The doctor said that the trend was positive and that if everything went well, I would be discharged in a couple of days. The students nodded and wrote something down in their notebooks. After the rounds, I decided to take a short walk down the corridor. The nurse said that movement was good, but I shouldn't overexert myself. I slowly made my way to the end of the corridor, where there was a small sofa by a large window, and sat down to rest. From there, I could see the parking lot in front of the hospital, where sparrows were running between the cars, picking up crumbs. Suddenly, I heard a familiar voice coming from the office across the hall. The door was ajar, and I could see Fenella talking to Dr. Horowitz through the crack. She had obviously arrived early in the morning and was waiting for the doctor. I was curious. Why did my daughter need to come without me? Doctor, I haven't slept all night worrying about my mother, Fenella said, her voice sounding genuinely alarmed. You have no idea how much she's suffering. She just doesn't show it. She's so proud. I understand your concern, Dr. Horowitz replied patiently. But your mother's condition is stable. Her test results are good, and her heart rhythm is returning to normal. But the pain, Fenella insisted, and I heard her pull her chair closer to the doctor's desk. Last night after you left, she was crying in pain, quietly so as not to disturb anyone, but I saw her. She was clutching her chest and breathing so heavily. I frowned. I hadn't cried at all. After my daughter left, I hadn't slept for a long time, but not because of the pain, but because of the anxiety caused by Fenella's strange behavior. Perhaps we should reconsider the dosage, my daughter continued. I understand that caution is needed at her age, but if the medication isn't helping, Mrs. Caswell, the doctor said slowly, as if weighing each word, increasing the dose of heart medication can be dangerous. These are not painkillers. An overdose can lead to serious complications. But what if the current dose isn't enough? What if her body has built up a tolerance to the medication? I've read that sometimes you have to adjust the treatment for it to be effective. I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something insistent, almost desperate, in my daughter's voice. It was as if she desperately wanted the doctor to agree to increase the dose. But why? Listen, the doctor sighed. Let me take another look at your mother. If she's really in that much pain, we'll find a way to help her. But I can't change the main treatment without a valid medical reason. Thank you, doctor. Fenella's voice sounded relieved. I knew you would understand. My mother is all I have. I quietly got up from the couch and hurried back to the ward, trying not to make any noise with my slippers. My heart was pounding, not from illness, but from what I had just heard. Fenella had lied to the doctor. Why did she need my medication increased? I sat down on the bed in the ward and tried to calm down. Maybe I had misunderstood something. Maybe my daughter was really worried and just wanted me to get better. But then why lie about the tears and the pain? Half an hour later, Fenella came in. She looked happy, almost joyful. Hi, Mom. She kissed me on the cheek. How are you feeling? Did you sleep well? I'm fine, I replied cautiously. You're early today. Yes, I wanted to talk to the doctor before work, to find out how you're doing and when you'll be discharged. And what did he say? Fenella hesitated for a second, then smiled. He said you're on the mend, but they need to keep an eye on you, and he agreed to adjust your treatment to make you more comfortable. Adjust it how? Well, increase the dosage, so the pain goes away faster. I looked at my daughter and realized I couldn't pretend I didn't notice anymore. What pain, Fenella? I told the doctor the pain wasn't bad. My daughter blushed but quickly regained her composure. Mom, you always hide it when you're in pain. I can see you wincing. I don't want you to suffer. I'm not grimacing, I said firmly. And I'm not crying from the pain, like you told the doctor. Fenella turned sharply toward me. Were you eavesdropping? I was sitting in the hallway and you were talking loudly. Why are you lying to Dr. Horowitz? My daughter was silent for a few seconds, and I could see her frantically thinking of a response. I'm not lying, she said finally. I know better than you what you need. You're too stubborn, Mom. You don't want to bother anyone. But I'm your daughter. I can't watch you suffer. I'm not suffering, Fenella. I really am better. How do you know? My daughter's voice was tinged with irritation. You're not a doctor, and Dr. Horowitz said that stronger therapy would help you recover faster. I wanted to argue, but at that moment the nurse came in with new medications. There were more pills, and some of them I hadn't seen before. These are new medications, the nurse explained. The doctor has adjusted your treatment. They should help with the pain. After the nurse and Fenella left, I sat for a long time, staring at the pills in the plastic cup. Something wasn't right. My daughter had been so insistent on increasing the dose, so happy when the doctor agreed. And yet, not long ago, she had been avoiding anything to do with medicine. In the evening, when the hospital quieted down and my daughter went home, I decided to make a call. My cell phone was on the nightstand, and I dialed the number of Britt Niven, my neighbor. We had been friends for over 15 years, ever since she moved into the house next door. Hello, Evadne? Britt's voice sounded surprised. How are you, dear? I heard you were in the hospital. Britt, I said quietly so as not to wake my roommate, I need your help. Can you come over? Of course, what happened? Is your heart okay? My heart is fine, but there's something else. I can't talk on the phone. Britt was a nurse before she retired and had worked at the same hospital for over 30 years. If anyone could help me figure out what was going on, it was her. I'll be there tomorrow morning, Britt promised. Hang in there, dear. The next day, around 11 in the morning, Britt showed up at the ward with a bouquet of daisies and a box of chocolates. She was a stout woman with gray hair pulled back into a neat bun and attentive gray eyes. She was dressed simply in a dark blue dress and comfortable low-heeled shoes. Evadne, dear. She hugged me gently so as not to touch the IV. How are you feeling? Better, I replied, relieved to see a familiar face. Thank you for coming. Britt sat down on a chair next to the bed and looked at me intently. What did you want to talk about? You sounded worried on the phone. I glanced around. My roommate was asleep after her afternoon nap, and the hallway was quiet. Britt, I began quietly, tell me honestly, what happens when an elderly person is given too much heart medication? Britt frowned. It depends on the medication and the dose, but in general, an overdose can be very dangerous. Arrhythmia, drop in blood pressure, kidney problems, in the worst case, cardiac arrest. Evadne, why are you asking me this? I told my friend about Fenella's strange behavior, how she insisted on increasing her dose, citing non-existent pain, and about the conversation I overheard with the doctor. Britt listened silently, and with every word I said, her face grew more serious. Evadne, she said finally, have you thought about why Fenella might want you to get worse? I didn't immediately understand what she meant. Then it dawned on me, and my stomach twisted in horror. You think she wants? I don't think anything, Britt interrupted quickly. But you have to be careful, very careful, especially with the medication. But what can I do? Refuse treatment? Britt thought for a moment, looking out the window. When do they give you the pills? She asked. In the morning, at lunchtime, and in the evening. The nurse brings them in a cup. Does the nurse make sure you take them? Not always. Sometimes she just leaves them on the bedside table if I'm asleep or in the shower. Britt nodded. Listen to me carefully. Tomorrow I'll come back with the pies. And in the box there will be vitamins. The same color and size as your heart medication. If you're really afraid that Fenella is up to something bad, we can switch the pills. But how? I'll bring the vitamins and you hide the real pills. No one will notice. I looked at my friend and realized that she was offering me the only way to keep myself safe. If Fenella was really planning what I was afraid to even think about, switching the pills could save my life. And if I was wrong, the vitamins wouldn't hurt, and in a few days, everything would be clear. Okay, I whispered. Let's do it. Britt squeezed my hand. Don't worry, sweetie. I'll come by around 2 tomorrow during quiet hours. After Britt left, I lay there thinking that my own daughter might want to kill me. It seemed unreal, like something out of a detective novel. But the facts spoke for themselves. Lying to the doctor, insisting on a higher dose, her strange interest in my treatment. What could have driven Fenella to do this? Money? She was in financial trouble after the divorce, and my house in Miramar was worth a lot. A large plot of land in a good neighborhood. If something happened to me, she would be the sole heir to the house. I remembered how Fenella had recently been talking a lot about how hard it was for me to live alone in such a big house. She said it would be nice to sell it and move to a smaller apartment. At the time, I thought my daughter was concerned about my comfort. Now I realized she was calculating how much she could get for the property. In the evening, Fenella came over with apples and magazines. She seemed calm, almost cheerful, asking how I was feeling and telling me news from work. She was the usual caring daughter visiting her sick mother. If I hadn't overheard the conversation, I would never have suspected her of any ill intentions. Mom, do you think the new medication is helping? She asked casually. I don't know, I replied cautiously. It's too early to tell. Dr. Horowitz said that if the tests are good tomorrow, he might increase the dose a little more to reinforce the effect. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Tomorrow, Britt would bring vitamins, and then we would see what my daughter really wanted. The next day, I woke up earlier than usual, at 6:30 in the morning. It was still dark outside, but the morning bustle had already begun in the hospital corridors. Somewhere in the distance, elevators rang, wheelchairs squeaked, and the muffled voices of medical staff could be heard. I lay there thinking about the day ahead, about the conversation with Britt that could change everything. My roommate was snoring peacefully, turned toward the wall. Poor woman, she was about 80 years old and constantly confused day and night, calling the nurses by the names of her long-dead friends. Sometimes I thought that maybe it was better that way, to live in your own world, where there was no betrayal or lies. At 7 in the morning, the nurse on duty arrived, a young woman who had been working here for only 6 months. She brought me my morning medication in a familiar plastic cup. I looked at the pills. There were indeed more of them, and some were larger than usual. What are these new ones? I asked, pointing to the large white pill. An additional heart medication, replied the nurse, checking my pulse. Dr. Horowitz prescribed it yesterday. It should help stabilize your heart rhythm. I nodded and swallowed the pills with some water. I wonder if this girl knows what can happen if you give an elderly person too high a dose of heart medication. She probably learned about it in nursing school, but she hasn't encountered it in real life yet. After breakfast, Dr. Horowitz arrived. He looked tired. He had probably been on call all night. He listened to my heart, checked my blood pressure, and looked at my chart. How are you feeling, Mrs. Caswell? He asked, sitting down on a chair next to the bed. Not bad, I replied honestly. I'm breathing easier than I did the day before yesterday. That's good. What about the chest pains? Your daughter is very worried and says you're in a lot of pain. I looked the doctor in the eye. This man really wanted to help me. He didn't know that Fenella was lying to him. Doctor, I said cautiously, the pain isn't that bad. I don't understand why my daughter is insisting on increasing the dose. Dr. Horowitz frowned. She says you're hiding your condition, that you're used to enduring it and don't want to bother anyone. Perhaps, I replied evasively. I didn't want to accuse Fenella of lying without having any proof. All right, the doctor said, standing up. Let's observe her for another day or two. If the pain doesn't subside, we'll consider adjusting her treatment. After the doctor left, I sat down by the window and waited for Britt. It was cloudy outside, with a light drizzle falling. The trees in the hospital courtyard were bare, with only a few yellow leaves hanging from the branches here and there. Winter is coming, I thought. It would be nice to welcome it at home, in my warm house, rather than in a hospital ward. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Britt appeared in the doorway. She was wearing a light gray coat and carrying a large wicker basket that smelled deliciously of fresh pastries. Hi, sweetie. Britt kissed me on the cheek and placed the basket on the bedside table. I brought you some homemade cabbage pies. I remember you like them. Thank you, I smiled, but my heart was pounding with excitement. My roommate was sleeping after lunch, and the hallway was quiet as usual. Most of the patients were resting, and the staff was making notes in their journals or snacking in the doctor's lounge. Britt sat down on a chair and took a box of pies out of the basket. Underneath them was a small plastic bag with colorful vitamins. Here, she said quietly, showing me the contents of the bag. I picked them by color and size. The big white ones are calcium, the small blue ones are vitamin C, and the yellow ones are vitamin D. They're all harmless. I took the bag and compared the vitamins to the morning medication the nurse had left for lunch. The resemblance was striking. When will they bring you your next pills? Britt asked. At 6 in the evening. Usually the nurse just puts the cup on the nightstand and leaves if I'm not asleep. Then replace them after she leaves, and hide the real medicine. Britt took a small envelope out of her purse. Put these in here and hide them in the nightstand, behind the books. If anyone suspects anything, tell them they're vitamins I brought. I nodded, hiding the envelope in the nightstand drawer. Britt, what if I'm wrong? What if Fenella is just being overly sensitive? Then nothing bad will happen, my friend reassured me. A few days on vitamins won't hurt you, and if you're right. She didn't finish, but I understood. If I was right, switching the pills could save my life. Britt stayed with me for another hour, telling me neighborhood news and asking how I was feeling. When she left, I felt more confident. I had a plan and I had support. At 4 o'clock, Fenella arrived. She was in high spirits, bringing new magazines and a box of chocolates. Mom, you look good today, she said, sitting down in a chair. Your complexion is better. Thank you, dear. I feel pretty good. Fenella picked up my medical chart and began studying it. She had never been interested in medical records before, but now she read them with such attention, as if she were preparing for an exam. What are these new appointments? She asked, pointing to the doctor's latest notes. Dr. Horowitz adjusted the treatment as you requested. Good. Fenella nodded with satisfaction. Did he say anything about increasing the dose further? He said he'd observe you for another day or two. Her daughter frowned. That's strange. I thought he'd be more decisive about the treatment. Maybe I should talk to him again? Why? I tried to sound calm. I'm feeling better. But you're still complaining about the pain. I'm not complaining, Fenella. You are, my daughter insisted. You just don't want to admit it. I can see you wincing. I looked at Fenella and suddenly realized that she was trying to convince not only the doctor, but also herself. Perhaps she needed to justify what she was doing to herself. At 6 o'clock in the evening, the nurse came with another dose of medicine. She put the cup on the bedside table and was about to leave. Excuse me, I called. Can I take them later? I feel a little nauseous after dinner. Of course, the girl replied. Just don't forget, these are important medications. After the nurse left, I quickly transferred the real pills into an envelope and hid it in the nightstand behind some books. Then I took out the vitamins Britt had brought and put them in a plastic cup. The resemblance was striking. If you didn't know they had been switched, no one would suspect anything strange. I took the cup and swallowed the vitamins with water. It was a strange feeling to pretend to take the medicine prescribed by the doctor when I was actually deceiving everyone around me. But if my suspicions about Fenella were correct, then it was justified. The next morning, Dr. Horowitz arrived with Fenella. Apparently, my daughter had waited for him in the hallway and asked to speak with him. Doctor, Fenella said while the doctor examined me. My mother complained of pain again last night. Very severe pain. She couldn't even sleep. I opened my mouth to object, but Fenella continued. I think the current dosage is still too low. Maybe we should increase it a little more? Dr. Horowitz looked at me. Mrs. Caswell, is that true? Have you been in pain? I met my daughter's gaze. Her eyes pleaded with me to agree, to say that I was in pain. It hurt a little, I said vaguely. Not a little, it hurt a lot, Fenella chimed in immediately. Mom, don't be shy. The doctor needs to know the truth. The doctor shook his head thoughtfully. All right, I'll increase the dosage by 1 pill a day. But that's the limit. We can't increase it anymore. It could be dangerous. Of course, doctor, agreed Fenella. and I noticed the relief in her voice. You know best. After they left, I was left alone with my thoughts. Fenella had gotten her way. The doctor had agreed to increase the dose to the maximum possible. If I had actually taken those pills, the consequences could have been disastrous. At lunchtime, the nurse brought new pills. There were even more of them, and among them were two large white ones that hadn't been there before. What are these? I asked. Additional heart medication, the nurse explained. The doctor has increased the dosage. He says you need more intensive treatment. I nodded and waited for the nurse to leave. Then I repeated the substitution procedure, hiding the real pills in the envelope and putting the vitamins in the cup. Britt had thoughtfully given me extra vitamins, so I had enough for the increased dose. After swallowing the harmless vitamins, I felt a strange sense of relief. If it hadn't been for the switch, I would have swallowed a dose of heart medication that could have been fatal. In the evening, Fenella came back. She looked agitated and kept glancing at her watch. Mom, how are you feeling after the increased dose? She asked. Nothing yet, I replied. It's too soon. What about the pain? Is it less? I don't know yet. Fenella nervously fiddled with the strap of her purse. It seemed to me that she was waiting for some effect from the new medication, waiting for me to get worse. Maybe we should call the doctor? She suggested. To see how you react to the new dosage? Why? I told you I feel fine, but you might not notice any changes. The doctor will see them right away. I realized that Fenella was expecting to see signs of an overdose. Perhaps she was counting on me feeling sick by evening, so she could blame it on individual intolerance or complications. Don't bother the doctor, I said firmly. If anything's wrong, the nurses will notice right away. Fenella stayed with me for another hour, but I could see she was disappointed. She was clearly expecting a different reaction to the increased dose of medication. When my daughter left, I lay down and closed my eyes. The first day of the switch had been successful. Fenella didn't suspect anything strange, and I had avoided a dangerous overdose. But what would happen tomorrow? And the day after tomorrow? How many more days would I have to pretend? I thought about how my life had changed over the past few days. A week ago, I was an ordinary elderly woman who lived alone in her house and sometimes saw her only daughter. Now I was lying in a hospital bed, suspecting that very same daughter of trying to poison me. The worst part wasn't even that Fenella wanted me dead. The worst part was that she was such a skilled liar, so convincing in her portrayal of concern. If I hadn't overheard a conversation by accident, I would never have suspected a thing. Before going to bed, I took another dose of vitamins instead of my real medication. Tomorrow, we'll see what happens next. The next morning, Fenella arrived earlier than usual, at 8:30 before breakfast. She looked tired, as if she hadn't slept well, but there was a nervous anticipation in her eyes. She was carrying a bag with a thermos and sandwiches. Hi, Mom. She kissed me on the cheek and sat down on a chair next to the bed. How was your night? Fine, I replied. You're early today. Aren't you going to work? I took the day off. Fenella took the thermos out of her bag and opened it. The smell of homemade coffee filled the room. I want to be with you. See how you react to the new treatment. I nodded, but inside I felt cold. Fenella never took time off work to sit with me in the hospital. Even when my father died, she went back to work 3 days after the funeral. And now she had decided to spend the whole day at my bedside? That's very sweet of you, dear, I said cautiously. But you don't have to. I'm better, really. I want to be sure, Fenella said, pouring coffee into a plastic cup and taking a sip. The doctor said yesterday that this is the maximum dosage. It's important to see how your body reacts. At 9 in the morning, the nurse arrived with breakfast and my morning medication. I couldn't swap them out while Fenella was there, so I swallowed the real pills, hoping that one dose wouldn't do too much harm. My daughter watched me closely, writing something down in her notebook. How many are there now? Fenella asked, looking at the empty cup. There were fewer before. Yes, the doctor added another one. I finished my water and put the cup on the nightstand, already feeling slightly dizzy. Fenella looked at her watch and wrote something down again. What are you writing? I asked. I'm keeping a diary of your condition, my daughter explained. the time you take your medication, how you feel. It will be useful for the doctor to know the dynamics. I felt uneasy. Fenella was keeping a diary of my condition, writing down the time I took my medication, as if she expected something important to happen after a certain amount of time. At 10 o'clock, Dr. Horowitz came in for his rounds. Fenella immediately stood up and went over to him. "Doctor," she began, "I took the day off to watch my mother. I want to make sure the new dosage is right for her." "Very thoughtful," the doctor approved. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Caswell?" "Not bad," I replied, although my heart was beating faster than usual. "Just a little dizzy." The doctor listened to my heart, checked my pulse and blood pressure. "Your pulse is rapid, but that may be a normal reaction to the new dosage. Let's keep an eye on it. If you experience any unpleasant symptoms, call the nurse immediately." I noticed Fenella's eyes light up with satisfaction. Apparently, she had been expecting just such a change. "How long does it usually take for the new medication to take full effect?" she asked. "Usually within a few hours," replied the doctor, "but it varies from patient to patient. The main thing is to monitor her condition closely." After the doctor left, Fenella wrote something down in her notebook and looked at the clock. It was 10:30. "Mom, how are you feeling now?" she asked. "Is the dizziness getting worse?" "A little," I replied honestly. The effect of the morning dose of real medicine was quite noticeable. "That's normal," Fenella nodded, writing down my words. "Your body is adjusting to the new dose." I looked at my daughter. She was talking about my symptoms as if she were happy about them. By lunchtime, I was indeed feeling worse. The dizziness had intensified, I felt weak, and my heart was beating irregularly. When the nurse brought the next dose of medication, I realized that I couldn't take another one. It could be dangerous. "You know," I said to Fenella, "I think I need to use the restroom. I feel a little nauseous." "Of course, Mom. Do you want me to help you?" "No, I can manage." I slowly got out of bed, took my medicine, and went to the small bathroom next to the ward. There, I quickly poured the real pills into the toilet and flushed them down, then put the vitamins Britt had given me into a cup. When I returned, I swallowed the harmless vitamins in front of my daughter. "How are you feeling?" Fenella asked attentively. "The nausea is gone," I replied. "And the dizziness seems to have subsided as well." My daughter wrote this down in her notebook, but I noticed a slight look of confusion on her face. She was probably expecting me to feel worse after the second dose. By 2 o'clock, thanks to taking vitamins instead of medicine, I was actually feeling better. The dizziness had almost gone, and my heart was beating more steadily. Fenella looked more and more confused with each passing hour. "Maybe we should call a doctor," she suggested, "to see if the medicine is working." "Why? You can see I'm better. But maybe it's cumulative? Maybe we should wait a little longer?" I realized that Fenella was starting to panic. She had expected me to be feeling terrible by now, but the vitamins were having the opposite effect. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, my daughter was visibly nervous. She would get up and walk around the room, then sit down and write something quickly in her notebook. I saw her massaging her temples with her hands. "Fenella, are you okay?" I asked. "Maybe you should go home and rest?" "No, no," she replied quickly. "I'll stay. I want to make sure you're okay." But with every passing hour, she looked worse and worse. Her face was pale, she had dark circles under her eyes, and her hands were shaking. By 4 o'clock, she began to complain of a headache. "My head is splitting," Fenella said, pressing her palms to her temples. "It must be the stress. I was so worried about you." "Poor thing," I sympathized with my daughter. "Maybe you should take something for the pain?" "I don't have anything with me," Fenella grimaced in pain. "I didn't think it would hurt this much." I looked at the nightstand where my evening medications were. The nurse had brought them half an hour ago, but I said I would take them later. Among them were the real extra-strength pills. "You know what?" I said, pretending I had a good idea. "I have some strong painkillers. The doctor prescribed them for heart pain. Try them. They might help." "Can I?" Fenella raised her head and looked at me hopefully. "They're not harmful? What's one pill going to do to you?" I got up and went to the nightstand. "They're very strong and work fast." I picked one of the large white pills from the cup, the one the doctor had added when he increased the dose. It was a powerful heart medication intended for elderly patients. Here, I handed the pill to my daughter. This is the most effective one. The doctor said it was very strong. Fenella took the pill and examined it carefully. Are you sure it's okay? It's your medicine. Of course it's okay. One pill won't hurt. I don't need it right now. I feel fine. My daughter hesitated for a few more seconds, then resolutely put the pill in her mouth and washed it down with water from my glass. Thanks, Mom. I hope it helps. My head is splitting. I sat back down on the bed and watched Fenella. She had now taken a dose of heart medication intended for a sick person of my age. But Fenella was healthy, only 44 years old, and her heart was not ready for such a strain. How long does it take to work? My daughter asked after 10 minutes. Usually it's quick, I replied. It should start to ease in 20 to 30 minutes. Fenella nodded and leaned back in her chair. She closed her eyes and massaged her temples. I looked at her and thought about how justice sometimes takes strange forms. 20 minutes later, my daughter opened her eyes. I think the headache is going away, she said, but my heart feels strange. Probably from the stress, I said indifferently. You've been nervous all day. Yes, probably. Fenella tried to smile, but it came out forced. Mom, what is this medicine? It's very strong. Dr. Horowitz prescribed it. He said it's the maximum dosage for my age. My daughter nodded, but I noticed that she was starting to fidget restlessly in her chair. Her face grew paler and her breathing quickened. Mom, she said after half an hour, I feel strange. It's like my heart is skipping beats. Maybe you should go home, I suggested. Rest, get some sleep. You're so tired today. No, I'll stay. Fenella shook her head, but the movement was uncertain. I want to make sure you're okay. But with every passing minute, she felt worse. She put her hand on her chest, then grabbed the chair, as if afraid of falling. Her face was covered with tiny beads of sweat. Fenella, are you sure you're feeling okay? I asked with feigned concern. Not really, my daughter admitted. Something's wrong with my heart. It's beating strangely, and it's hard to breathe. Maybe we should call a doctor? I suggested. No, Fenella shook her head. It'll pass. It's probably just fatigue, but it only got worse. An hour after taking the pill, my daughter was struggling to stay in her chair. Her skin turned gray, her lips turned slightly blue, and her breathing became shallow and rapid. Mom, she whispered, I feel really sick. Call the nurse. I pressed the call button, and a minute later the nurse on duty rushed into the room. What's wrong? She asked, looking at the pale Fenella. My daughter isn't feeling well, I said. She's been complaining about her heart. The nurse quickly checked Fenella's pulse. Arrhythmia, she said. Very serious. She needs to go to the cardiology department immediately. But I'm healthy, Fenella protested weakly. I've never had any heart problems. You do now, said the nurse, calling the doctors on the phone. We need urgent help. A few minutes later, doctors rushed into the room with a stretcher. Fenella was quickly transferred and taken to intensive care. She was conscious but looked very ill. What could have caused such a reaction? One of the doctors asked the nurse. I don't know. She's a healthy young woman, maybe stress or exhaustion. When Fenella was taken away, the ward fell silent. I sat on the bed and looked out the window. Justice had been served in the most unexpected way. My daughter had received the dose of medication that was intended for me. In the evening, when they brought dinner and the remaining medication, I replaced them with vitamins as usual and swallowed them. It was already dark outside. Somewhere in the same hospital, in intensive care, Fenella was fighting the effects of an overdose of the very drugs she had wanted to poison me with. I spent the next 2 days in a strange state of anticipation. Fenella was in intensive care, and I continued to take vitamins instead of medication and felt better every day. The nurses were amazed at my rapid recovery, constantly checking my blood pressure and pulse, recording the readings on my chart with puzzled looks. Dr. Horowitz came in several times a day, as if he couldn't believe such positive progress in a patient my age after a heart attack. I was receiving conflicting information about my daughter. The nurses whispered that the young woman was on the mend, while the doctors frowned and shook their heads, discussing something among themselves in hushed tones in the hallway. I didn't press for details, After all, whatever happened to Fenella was the result of her own actions and plans. Sometimes I caught strange glances from the medical staff. It seemed as if they were trying to understand how it was possible that the mother was recovering quickly while her daughter was fighting for her life in intensive care. But no one asked any direct questions, limiting themselves to platitudes about how medicine is full of mysteries and how every body reacts differently. On the third day, Dr. Horowitz came to see me. He looked exhausted and puzzled, as if he hadn't slept for several nights in a row. Dark circles had formed under his eyes, and his usually neatly combed hair was disheveled. He was holding a thick folder with test results, and he flipped through the pages several times, as if hoping to find answers to the questions that were tormenting him. "Mrs. Caswell," he began, settling into a chair next to the bed and placing the folder on his lap. "I need to talk to you about what happened to your daughter. This is a very unusual case, and we are trying to understand what happened." "Of course, doctor. How is she feeling?" "No one will tell me anything, only that her condition is stable. Physically, she's much better than she was 3 days ago. We've managed to stabilize her heart rhythm, eliminate the arrhythmia, and the immediate danger to her life has passed. But the results of the toxicology tests are raising a lot of questions and, frankly, baffling us." The doctor opened a folder and showed me a sheet of paper with numbers and incomprehensible medical terms. "A very high concentration of digoxin was found in your daughter's body. This is one of the heart medications we prescribe to you in an increased dosage. The level of this substance in her blood is almost 5 times the therapeutic norm. For a healthy person, this amount of the drug could be fatal." I looked closely at the test results, pretending to be surprised, although I knew perfectly well where the digoxin in Fenella's blood had come from. But where did she get this medicine? As far as I know, Fenella doesn't take any serious medication. Sometimes she takes painkillers for headaches or vitamins to boost her immune system. That's why we find this situation extremely strange and in need of explanation. Digoxin is not a drug that can be bought over the counter. It is a serious heart medication that is only prescribed by a doctor and taken under strict supervision. The only reasonable explanation we can think of is that she somehow took your medication. Perhaps she accidentally mixed up the pills. I thought hard, frowning, and pretending to try to reconstruct the events of that fateful day. The pause dragged on. I wanted the doctor to believe my reasoning. "You know, doctor," I said finally, as if remembering an important detail, "now that you mention it, I remember something strange. On the day Fennell became ill, she had a very bad headache. She sat with me in the ward all day, worrying about my condition, nervous, constantly writing something down in her notebook. By evening, the headache had become completely unbearable. She was even holding her temples and saying that her head was splitting." Dr. Horowitz listened attentively, occasionally nodding and making notes in his notebook. "Fenella asked for something for the pain," I continued. "I didn't have any regular painkillers with me, only the medication the nurse had brought for the evening. My daughter looked so miserable that I felt sorry for her. I thought that one strong painkiller wouldn't hurt a healthy person, so I gave her one of my pills." "Do you remember which pill you gave her?" "I remember it was a large white pill. I told Fenella that it was very strong and would definitely help. She swallowed the pill and even thanked me. After a while, she said that her headache was really starting to go away." Dr. Horowitz nodded and made a few more notes in his notebook. "That explains a lot. Digoxin in a therapeutic dose for an elderly patient with heart failure can indeed cause severe intoxication in a healthy young person. This drug has a very narrow range between therapeutic and toxic doses, as well as a tendency to accumulate in body tissues. In people without heart disease, it can lead to serious heart rhythm disturbances, even cardiac arrest." "My God," I clapped my hands and tried to look genuinely upset. "So it's my fault what happened to my daughter. I wanted to help her get rid of her headache, and I almost killed her. How could I have been so careless?" "Don't blame yourself." The doctor shook his head and even reached out to pat me reassuringly on the shoulder. "You acted with the best of intentions, trying to help someone who was suffering. Just remember for the future that heart medications are very serious drugs with a narrow therapeutic range that should never be taken without a doctor's prescription and appropriate examination. Even a single pill can be extremely dangerous for an unprepared body." After the doctor left, I sat by the window for a long time, watching the hospital courtyard. The weather outside was gloomy and autumnal, with a light drizzle falling, and orderlies in rubber boots methodically raked up fallen leaves, preparing the grounds for the approaching winter. Elderly patients in bathrobes occasionally came out to smoke under the canopy, but quickly returned inside. It was cold and damp. Life went on as usual, and none of these people had any idea of the drama that had unfolded within the hospital walls over the past few days. To everyone around, it was a familiar story. A caring elderly mother had accidentally given her daughter her medication, leading to an accident. No one knew about Fenella's real plans or how I had managed to protect myself from my own child. On the fourth day, I was discharged from the hospital. Dr. Horowitz was quite pleased with the progress I had made and even expressed surprise at how well my body had responded to the intensive treatment. He wrote a prescription for maintenance treatment, the same medications, but in much lower doses. Your body responded excellently to the intensive treatment, he explained, writing the prescription in his traditionally illegible doctor's handwriting. Your heart muscle has recovered faster than we expected, your rhythm has stabilized, and your blood pressure is back to normal. Now, maintenance doses will be enough to prevent further attacks. Take them for a month, then be sure to come in for a follow-up exam so we can assess the effectiveness of the therapy. I took the prescription and carefully folded it into my purse, knowing full well that it would go straight into the trash as soon as I got home. The vitamins I had been taking instead of heart medication in recent days had been much more beneficial to me than any drugs with their unpredictable side effects. Britt arrived to pick me up in her old but reliable car. While I gathered my few belongings, a couple of changes of shirts, toiletries, a book I hadn't finished reading, she waited patiently in the hallway, chatting with the nurses she knew. Over her many years working at this hospital, she had made many friends and colleagues who were always happy to see her. On the way home, I told my friend in detail about my conversation with Dr. Horowitz and how I had managed to explain the high level of heart medication in Fenella's blood in a plausible way. So, it's officially considered an accident now? Britt asked, slowing down at the next traffic light and looking at me intently. That's right. The medical records will state that a caring mother carelessly gave her sick daughter her medication without thinking about the possible consequences for a healthy body. What will happen to Fenella now? How long will she have to stay in the hospital? I think she'll be discharged in a few days. The doctor said that the main danger has passed and she just needs to recover. But she's learned a serious lesson. She's not likely to forget what it's like to lie in intensive care with a heart arrhythmia anytime soon. The house greeted me with its usual coolness and silence. During the week I was away, signs of neglect had accumulated. The mailbox was overflowing with letters, the flowers on the windowsills had wilted, and all the perishable food in the refrigerator had gone bad, filling the kitchen with an unpleasant smell. I methodically set about tidying up, finding something calming in this routine work. I threw out the spoiled food and thoroughly cleaned the refrigerator, watered all the flowers and removed the dried leaves, sorted through the accumulated mail, and divided the letters into categories according to importance. Among the letters were the usual utility bills, a reminder to renew my home insurance, advertising brochures from various stores, and, as luck would have it, a colorful brochure from a funeral home offering a discount on prepaid funeral services. The last one made me smile involuntarily. Just a week ago, Fenella was probably already mentally leafing through similar catalogs, planning my funeral and estimating the cost of the ceremony. The next few days passed in the measured rhythm of ordinary household chores. I went grocery shopping, met with old neighbors who asked about my health and wished me a speedy recovery, tidied up the garden before the coming winter, pruned the roses, covered the heat-loving plants, picked the last apples from the tree. Britt came by almost every day, sometimes with homemade pies, sometimes with news from our neighborhood, sometimes just to chat over a cup of tea. She was the only person who knew the whole truth about what had happened at the hospital, and it was important to me to have such a reliable ally and witness. "Isn't it hard for you alone?" my friend asked, helping me cover the rose bushes for the winter. "Maybe you should hire a housekeeper?" "I'm managing so far," I replied, tying the covering material to the stakes. Besides, housework keeps me in shape. It's better than any medicine for the heart. Fenella was discharged exactly 1 week after me. She called late that evening, just as I was getting ready for bed. The phone rang sharply and unexpectedly in the silence of the house, making me jump and fear for a moment that something had happened. Mom, it's me. My daughter's voice sounded noticeably weaker than usual, breathless, but there was no anger or open reproach in it. How are you? How's your health after being discharged? Everything's fine, Fenella. Home is always better than the hospital. How are you feeling? Are the doctors happy with your condition? I'm recovering gradually, but slowly. The doctors warned that it could take a month or two to fully recover. I can't exert myself physically yet. I have to take it easy. Mom, I really need to talk to you seriously about what happened at the hospital. Can I come over tomorrow? Of course, come whenever it's convenient for you. I hung up and stood in the kitchen for a long time, looking out the window at the darkening garden, where bare tree branches swayed in the gusts of wind. This conversation was completely inevitable, and it was better to have it as soon as possible to finally put an end to our changed relationship. Fenella arrived the next day in the late afternoon, when it was already beginning to get dark. I saw her from the living room window. She was walking slowly from the gate to the house, stopping frequently and leaning on the fence, as if each step was a great effort. My daughter looked really unwell, noticeably thinner, with a pale face and dark circles under her eyes. The illness had clearly taken its toll on her and left a noticeable mark. I met her at the front door and showed her into the kitchen without offering her a coat. It was clear that her visit would be short. We sat down at the old wooden table where many years ago we had done our homework when Fenella was a diligent schoolgirl, discussed her plans for the future when she was applying to college, and even celebrated her wedding, which now seemed like an event from another life. How are you feeling? I asked, pouring tea into familiar cups. I'm still feeling weak, and my heart skips a beat from time to time, especially when I get excited. But the doctors are sure that these are temporary symptoms and that everything will gradually return to normal, Fenella said, carefully taking the cup and looking at me intently. Mom, I clearly remember everything that happened in the hospital that day when I felt ill. What exactly do you remember? I remember watching you very closely all day. I wrote down the exact times you took your medication, your reaction to the drugs, any changes in how you felt. I remember how my head started to hurt badly from the tension in the evening, and you offered me a painkiller. I nodded silently and continued to drink my tea calmly. The doctor explained to me later that it was your heart medication in a very high dose. He said that for a healthy person, that amount of the active ingredient could be deadly. I honestly didn't know it could be so dangerous for a healthy person, I replied in an even voice. I just wanted to help you with your bad headache. I thought one strong painkiller wouldn't hurt. Fenella put her cup on the table and was quiet for a long time, staring out the window, where it was now completely dark. Mom, did you happen to overhear my conversations with Dr. Horowitz? The ones where I insisted that he increase your medication dosage? I did, I replied without hesitation. And what did you think about that at the time? At first, I thought you were very concerned about my health and wanted the treatment to be as effective as possible. Then, when I analyzed your behavior more carefully, I realized that it was not just a daughter's concern. My daughter lowered her head and was silent for a while. So you understood that I was planning. I understood. We sat in silence for several long minutes. The wind picked up outside, and I listened to it rustling in the treetops, scattering the last autumn leaves. A dog barked in the distance, and the occasional sound of passing cars could be heard from the highway. What did you do when you realized what I was planning? Fenella finally asked in a quiet voice. I turned to Britt Niven for help. She helped me replace the real medication with harmless vitamins that looked similar. I hid the dangerous drugs. The whole time you were in the hospital? Yes, from the day I finally understood your true intentions. And the pill you gave me for my headache that evening? That was the real thing. The very one you wanted me to take in a higher dose. Fenella slowly raised her head and looked at me for a long time. Her eyes revealed a whole range of complex emotions: anger, resentment, disappointment, but at the same time something like involuntary respect. So you deliberately gave me that poison pill. I gave you exactly the medicine you had planned to give me, in the exact dose you had planned. Was this your revenge for my plans? It was simple justice. My daughter slowly got up from the table and walked slowly across the kitchen. Her movements were cautious and uncertain, clearly affected by the serious effects of drug intoxication. I could have died from that dose. You could have, certainly, but the doctors managed to save you in time. Unlike me, if your carefully thought out plan had succeeded, there would have been no one left to save. Fenella stopped at the window and stared into the darkness where the silhouettes of trees were barely visible. What will happen between us now, Mom? She asked without turning to me. Nothing special. You'll live your life, and I'll live mine, each of us on our own. So you don't want to see me anymore? That's right. My daughter slowly turned around. Her face was very pale but surprisingly calm. I see. What will happen to the house when you die? What exactly do you mean? Will you change your will to disinherit me? I looked at her closely and realized with surprise that even now, after everything that had happened between us, she was still concerned about inheritance and money. I already have. I went to the notary in town the day before yesterday. And who will get the house now? The city shelter for homeless animals. I decided it would serve a much more worthy cause. Fenella jerked away as if she had been slapped. But it's my childhood home. I spent the best years of my life there. It's my house and mine alone, I replied firmly, and I have every right to decide who gets it after I die. I'd rather it be used to save defenseless animals than to enrich a man who tried to kill me just for money. My daughter silently headed for the exit. She stopped at the kitchen door and turned around. Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Fenella. I walked her to the door but didn't go out onto the porch. It was cold and windy outside. Closing the door, I turned the key in the lock and listened to my daughter's footsteps receding along the garden path. Then the gate slammed and the car started. Returning to the kitchen, I cleared the cups from the table and stood at the window for a long time. The rain started again, and the drops tapped monotonously on the glass. Strangely, I didn't feel the slightest sadness or regret about what had happened. Only a deep sense of relief and a strange lightness, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders forever. A burden I had carried for many years, without even noticing or understanding its true weight.